Hello and welcome to a video I've been excited to make for quite some time now. Today I would like to go over my favourite comics that I read this year. First of all, the images that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen aren't necessarily representative of every single comic I read this year. Some of them represent entire runs, some of them represent individual volumes, some of them I do a little bit differently, and I'll go over why as we talk about each one. And also the other thing I wanted to mention at the start of this video is just that, I know it's early December, I'm recording this December 1st, but you've got to kind of make the cut-off point somewhere, and if I make a video like this next year, I'll make sure to include comics that I read from December onwards in that. I think that's pretty much the accepted way of doing things, right? Now, when it comes to tracking comic reading activity, I didn't start until halfway through the year, so a lot of this stuff is retroactive, and I didn't keep notes on a lot of the earlier stuff, so I have included a don't recall tier, because there are some comics in here where I don't really recall the events of what happened, and therefore I don't think I can really rank it appropriately. But yeah, there's some stuff here. As you can see, it's been a very DC heavy year, but that is changing. I am swinging back in the Marvel direction, I think, a little bit at the minute, as you can see by some of the more recent entries here, or maybe just here. But anyway, this represents a lot of comics, this one. We'll talk about it. But yeah, let's, without any further ado, get into each comic book and what I felt about it. Starting with Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 2, because I don't know that I read Volume 1 this year. I don't know that it would have been possible to read Volume 1 this year. Another caveat I need to add, by the way, is I tried to track these in terms of their collected volumes when I read a lot of them as digital single issues via Marvel Unlimited, but it's just easier to try and track it in a spreadsheet and on a tier list this way, otherwise it would be an absolute nightmare. But yeah, Ultimate Spider-Man, I've been following and really enjoying. It's kind of like a take on Peter Parker if he was allowed to grow older and marry Mary Jane and have kids, and then their kids grow older, and what it would be like. And of course the other hook is it's in this separate Ultimate universe where superheroes don't really exist because the Maker went and stopped all of them from existing, nipped all their origin stories in the bud. But someone introduces Peter Parker to his radioactive spider. He gets bitten, he develops his powers, and he starts his career as Spider-Man. It's a little it's a little weird because a lot of the initial character motivations aren't there, so it's a little bit of a different version of a character, but that's kind of cool. But this is Volume 2 and Volume 3 I'm including here as well. And maybe probably a few issues past whatever Volume 3 collects. And I really, really, really enjoy Ultimate Spider-Man, and I do want to pick up these books physically. I think when I started out, I would probably have put it in my favorites, but now that I've been away from it for a while and I've had time to think about it and I've read lots of other comics, I think I'm just going to drop it in Fantastic Reads. But yeah, if you ever get the chance to check out Ultimate Spider-Man by Jonathan Hickman, you should absolutely do that because it's a fantastic time. Up next, we've got The Flash by Joshua Williamson, and when I say that sometimes one image can represent a lot of reading, I mean it, because this represents at least the first 10 trade paperback volumes. I got up to Force Quest, and this is an interesting one because I've found it difficult to get into The Flash in comics. I really enjoyed the first season of the CW show back when I watched it many years ago, and I've always been interested to get into The Flash comics due to that. And I've got a whole history of different comics I've tried. The Rebirth era is probably the best stuff I've read so far. I've had a really good time with it, and I remember I started reading this on Kindle Unlimited when I realized they had it. I tried a month free trial of Kindle Unlimited, and that's also how I read Watchmen. But yeah, this is certainly an interesting one to rate because I thought it started really strong, but I did drop off it before the end of a Joshua Williamson run because I just wasn't feeling all the Force Quest stuff and the different powers returning, so I think I'm just going to drop this one in a good time. I think it starts out fantastic, and maybe it ends fantastic as well. I just haven't got all the way through it, but I really enjoyed what I read of it, and I do want to get back to it at some point. Now, up next is Watchmen. I think someone in work recommended Watchmen to me. And again, I saw that it was on Kindle Unlimited and I decided to read it. This is probably the earliest stuff I've talked about on this channel. If you're not aware, I made this channel this year, and it's meant to be a reviews channel for books and shows and movies and stuff, but it has kind of become a comics review channel, at least for the moment. But yeah, Watchmen I reviewed both as a comic and as a movie, but speaking strictly about the comic, it's obviously a masterpiece. It's one of the first instances of someone really taking a magnifying glass to the superhero genre and going, okay, but how would that play out in the actual real world? And like introducing some more adult elements to the narrative and some more mature themes. And it's a masterpiece for a reason. I really love Watchmen. There's some stuff in it which I think, yeah, maybe hasn't aged too great or could be changed. Um, but I think, well, maybe not even changed because it is a work of art, and I think it would probably be heresy to change even like the things that are a bit iffy about it. But yeah, Watchmen, I don't think I can put this in fantastic reads because it's one of those books that changes the way you see comics. And it's very wordy. I don't mind that. But it stuck in my head for a long time after watching it, and I did quite enjoy the movie as well, I've got to say. But yeah, I've got a whole video about that if you're interested in checking that out. Now, I've put this here separately because it's technically its own separate thing. I read this as part of my Flash read-through because, comics aren't just single individual experiences in the DC or Marvel universe. And this is building up to an event which we're going to talk about in just a second. But yeah, this is like a little storyline, a few issues long, called Batman the Flash. It's called The Button, and it's about them discovering the smiley face button and like the beginning of like the crossover with the Watchmen universe. And it's fine. It's all right. It's a fun little story between the two of them. It has some Flash elements regarding Reverse Flash and stuff that gets built upon in the Flash's story by Joshua Williamson afterwards, which I quite enjoyed. I think I'm just going to put it next to the Flash in a good time. There's not too much else to say about it. And then we've got Doomsday Clock, which, I was skeptical about because it's obviously DC Comics trying to write a sequel to Watchmen and trying to incorporate Watchmen's universe into the DC universe. And there are so many things about this which could have gone wrong because, like, it's not even written by Alan Moore, it's written by Jeff Johns. And I will say this outright, it is not a piece of art comparable to Watchmen. I wouldn't even necessarily recommend it to people after reading Watchmen, but it is interesting and it's not bad. It's almost kind of like a think piece about, like, not necessarily contradicting Watchmen or being the opposite of Watchmen, but just kind of being like, okay, if you try to instill the values of Alan Moore into the DC universe, I mean, he does do some DC universe stuff, we'll talk about that in a bit, but like, does it really fit? Does everything he had to say about comics, is it right? Is it true? Is it the lens through which we should be seeing, for instance, Superman and stuff like that? And it kind of debunks some of that stuff, and I did like it. I'm gonna put that in a good time as well. It's, again, it doesn't come close to Watchmen itself, but if you like Watchmen and you like DC Comics, it's an interesting kind of crossover semi-sequel kind of a book that I would recommend to read. It's fun. Now, up next, we've got my first controversial one, The Death of Superman. I did not read The Death and Return of Superman. I just read The Death of Superman, and I read it in kind of like a not a very good way because I read DC Universe Infinite's kind of like reading order thing for it, but I remember, like, it didn't feel like a good reading order. I remember there were so many issues where I was like, I don't know who any of these characters are. This is a version of a Justice League I'm not familiar with characters who I don't know who they are, and I don't know why I should be caring about these people, and I'm going to skip some of this because it's very wordy and I don't care about these people. And I knew the basic premise that Doomsday kills Superman. They have a big fight and knock each other out, kill each other, and it's a big deal. And I just kind of read that and went, okay, I've read The Death of Superman. But here's my promise to you, I'm going to revisit this because I did not read this correctly, okay? I did not give this the respect and the time it deserved. I was very much, my head was in another place as well. I was reading something else. This was more of just like I'll see how this happened. I'll go check this out. And The compendium is currently on sale for £33 and it's like 1,300 pages or something crazy, The Death and Return of Superman, and I feel like maybe I should get that and read through that to get the full context of The Death of Superman and what people say is the most important part of it, the Return of Superman, where you see all of these other figures try and fill in the void. That's what makes it an actual interesting story. I kind of read up to the premise and stopped, so I'm aware this is on me. But I am being honest here when I put this in the category because it didn't land with me this time around. I will try again. Don't worry. Then I started to become interested in Nightwing and his rise as a character, and I think I read like as an issue or two of the Judas Contract about Robin becoming Nightwing, the decision he made there. I didn't read much more than that. I'm considering picking up the DC Finest volume of the Judas Contract and reading it properly. So yeah, this run of Teen Titans was written by Jeff Johns and it was around 2003. And something I'm realizing is I'm just not that big of a fan of the kind of DC Comics era around this time in general, like the early 2000s. There's several things about that era which just strike me as like off, or like a version of DC I'm not that excited to explore. And this very much feels like it's part of that, although there were some interesting things, and I've not completely, like, thrown in the towel when it comes to reading through this, but yeah, it didn't do much for me, and I kind of wandered off after one volume, which was partially due to the fact that I realised I was more interested in the story of Nightwing and how Nightwing came to be than I was in following the escapades of the Teen Titans. And also, one thing I want to mention about the Teen Titans comic there is, I grew up watching the Teen Titans cartoon, not Teen Titans Go or whatever it's called for kids, but like Teen Titans, which was more made for teenagers and stuff. And I've yet to really find a run that really like feels like that did. If anyone's got any suggestions, let me know. But Nightwing here, I'm afraid I'm going to have to put this one in the don't recall. I read Nightwing Year 1, that's what this is. I think I remember enjoying it, but I remember almost nothing about it. I remember Batman being kind of a dick towards Dick and him striking out on his own, but I don't really remember anything about the story other than that. And I don't think I can, in good conscience, rate this story, so I'm just going to leave it in the don't recall pile. This is going to be bait for the people who jump towards the end of a video just to see what I ranked everything without hearing my reasoning, and they're going to see this down here, because I think this is quite warmly received, and they're going to see this here, and they're going to leave a negative comment and a dislike. Just watch them, jump on them, devour them for me. But I also read the very first Nightwing outing, which isn't him going to Bloodhaven, by the way. I believe it's by the same writer, but it isn't that. And again, I'm going to have to put this in the don't recall pile. All I remember is he had very long hair, and he had a girlfriend, and he had to get to a train station. That's all I remember about this story, so that's also going to have to go in the do not recall pile. But don't worry, it's not all amnesia up in this house. We did also read the Rebirth era of Nightwing, which is not Tom Taylor's Nightwing, for those of you who don't know. That is coming up later. But no, the pre-Tom Taylor era of Nightwing. Hang on, let me go see who wrote it. Tim Seeley wrote this, and it was mostly drawn by someone called Javier Fernandez. And yeah, it was good. I liked it. It was a good time. I enjoyed this story. I would go on to, spoiler alert, enjoy future Nightwing stories more, but I did enjoy this, and then I accidentally, apparently, it was a good idea that I did this though, I accidentally skipped the Rick Grayson stuff between this and Tom Taylor, but I read all 7 volumes. Tim Seeley didn't write all 7 volumes. The 7th volume was written by a novelist called Benjamin Percy. At least I think I remember reading that he was a novelist. But yeah, I'm going to put this above Doomsday Clock and The Button. I'm going to put this next to The Flash because this was some genuinely good stuff, and a lot of it did set up the Tom Taylor run as well, which, I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to it, alright? Chill out. Next up, I have my first legitimately controversial opinion. This one isn't mitigated by the circumstances in which I read the story. All-Star Superman is overrated. I'm sorry. It's a good concept, the idea that Superman is dying and what would he do, but unfortunately it's a little bit weighed down by the fact that it's trying to be a comic which visits every villain or every aspect of Superman's character, and so while we've got some really good stuff with Lex Luthor in here and stuff, we also have some frankly outdated stuff about him having to win a contest for Lois Lane's heart even though they're already in a relationship, there's this god figure who appears. I think again, this is still a long time ago. Partially don't recall, but don't maybe not for me. No, it's not that bad. I'll put it in air. I'll put it top of air because it's just there's just some stuff in here which I did not like. There was some stuff in here I did like, but there was too much stuff that I outright did not like. And I keep seeing people sing the praises of All-Star Superman, and I keep side-eyeing them like, really? Okay. Because, again, a lot of his story felt like there should have been larger comic context surrounding it that maybe I should have been reading as well. Some of the plot, I think, advanced a little quickly. But no, it is its own thing. It is technically its own universe. And I think it is its own universe anyway. And yeah, it didn't do it for me, I'm afraid. Sorry. Next up, we have Rebirth Era Superman, which is mostly to do with the son of Superman. And I remember that's why I decided to read it, because I wanted to see him grow up and become the character he is today, which I've seen some stuff about, which I'm interested in. However, this also didn't really do it for me. I'm sorry. It's written well, don't get me wrong. I think maybe if I was a parent, it would hit harder. But a lot of the stuff, I'm just like, do I actually care about reading about this kid learning that he's the son of Superman and stuff? Is that something that super appeals to me? I didn't hate it, and I didn't read all of it. That's another thing. I read a few volumes of it. And I would probably think of it more fondly if I did stick around to see him grow and become Superman, son of Superman. But for the most part, it's definitely a father-son story, and I don't think I was necessarily in the mood or the place for a father-son story. As part of that, and as part of Action Comics at the time, we also have Superman Reborn, which is basically just saying, hey, New 52 Superman who died and the current Superman who was the old Superman are now the same person and they're the same Superman. Stop asking about it. And it was fine. I promise it's not all going in the air category. We've got some absolute bangers ahead of us, but this goes in the air category. It was probably a big deal at the time if you were reading comics monthly at the time. Next up, we've got Dark Knights Metal, Dark Knights Rising, and this is a book by James Tynion IV, I believe, all about the different evil Batmen, which is basically, what if Batman was every member of the Justice League but evil? We've got a Batman here who steals the Flash's powers. And becomes evil. We've got a Batman here who basically becomes Doomsday. And you know what? This is a really good time. I actually fuck with this. This is really cool. But on the flip side of that, the actual Dark Knights Metal event itself is Look, okay, so this is by Scott Snyder, right? Here's my reasoning. This is a really solid premise. The idea that there is a dark multiverse hidden beneath the current one. It's got some really good horror elements to it and all that, but the fact that it's all based around Batman is a little much for me. People talk a bit about how Batman has become the poster child for DC Comics and has been injected into almost every other character's story in some way or another, and it's a bit much. And I am a huge Batman fan, and I agree, it is a bit much. This got worse as it went on. Like, the premise was really cool. It was a bit Batman-centric. I would have preferred it to be a DC-wide thing. Like, I want to see the dark multiverse Superman and the dark multiverse Wonder Woman. I guess, to be fair, at that point, we're just doing Injustice League again. But you know what I mean, like, I guess in that way it's almost flawed as a concept, right? But then, like, later on, I didn't find the resolution to the story particularly interesting. It mostly just felt like an excuse to have this giant battle set piece. The Joker Dragon was a little much. There was a moment between Batman and the Joker regarding the Batman Who Laughs, which I thought was kind of cool, but I think it was, overall it was a little too flawed for me to put above Air. And I'll put it above Teen Titans, but it is nearing the bottom of Air. But yeah, Dark Knights Metal, Dark Knights Rising I really enjoyed because it was purely like the concept piece about all these different versions of Batman. And I'm a sucker for Elseworld stories, and like, what if this happened instead? And this is peak that. Up next, we have the rebirth era of the Justice League, which was mostly written by Brian Hitch, I believe. I think it does change towards the end of the run. But I really enjoyed this run of the Justice League, and I also really enjoyed the New 52 run of the Justice League back when I read that. So I think I'm a Justice League Andy fam. I think that's me. I think I'm that bitch. I love Justice League, and this is a good iteration. There were some really fun stories in here, and you know, if I had one criticism to make, I do remember being a little bit put off by the fact that these ensemble books often start with like, the world is ending and here are our heroes swiftly defeating the danger, and now they're going to stand around and talk and set up the premise for the actual book. I think that's been done to death a little bit, and I think it cheapens stakes in the DC universe as a whole if you just set up that they're constantly thwarting like these world-ending threats and not worrying too much about it. But other than that, there was some really good stuff in this book, and I might put this at the top of a good time. It's not quite a fantastic read, but it's up there. It's close. I might put it between The Flash and Nightwing. That's where it's gonna live. I hope it enjoys being in the middle of those two. I know I would. Anyway, it also spun off into a story called No Justice, which I included here because it is a separate title. Okay, so this is to do with Brainiac recruiting members of the Justice League and just most of the DC heroes in general to try and save another world, I think his world, right, from this threat, which is then going to come and mess up Earth. I don't remember what the threat necessarily was. I'm going to put it next to Dark Knight's Metal, Dark Knight's Rising. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I remember enjoying it. But it very much ties into the Justice League run of the time. Or I think it ends it, right? And then we get into Scott Snyder's Justice League, which I have not read the entirety of and I need to get back to. I should probably tell you how far through I read. I read up to Volume 4, The Sixth Dimension. And there's some really good stuff which happens in here. I will say Scott Snyder's definitely a better solo writer than he is an ensemble writer. And this, I think I prefer the Rebirth era of Justice League a little bit more than this one. That being said, it's a good time. I will put it in front of No Justice and behind Dark Knight's Metal, Dark Knight's Rising. That's where this Justice League belongs. I hope you enjoyed my decision-making noises. Okay, but so far, I've talked a lot about middling titles. But now we're getting to the Absolute books. And Absolute Batman, I do not have a controversial opinion about Absolute Batman. Absolute Batman is one of the best things I've read this year. It's so cool. You know how I just said Scott Snyder is better as a solo writer than an ensemble writer? This is him going back to writing a solo character. And the crazy thing about this, you can hear me getting hyped up. The crazy thing about this is that he has written a solo Batman title before, right? And you would probably think, well, what new take do you have on the Batman character, right? And the premise behind Absolute Batman is it's Bruce Wayne without the fortune. And so he's still Batman, but he's doing it from like a street level. That's not really that crazy of a reimagining for Batman. I think they've even taken away his fortune in like the Rebirth era of Batman comics. I haven't read them yet, but I think that's something that they do over there. So that's not that crazy. But what this really does is it reimagines Batman is a little bit more brutal, a little bit more street level, I would say. And it's honestly just fantastic. It's honestly not that too much of a departure from the original series or the original character, except in ways that I can't quite put my finger on. It's more of a departure in terms of vibes. One of the other main differences you will learn throughout the course of the book is his origin as Batman and who he loses and how that affects his life. And also, Alfred as a character is quite different as well. And he grows up with some people who have familiar names as well. Those are the main, I would say, differences with Absolute Batman. But I really want to collect this physically, despite having read it digitally. I read about half of what will probably make up the second trade paperback when that comes out. I was reading this month to month, but I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can be a month-to-month reader because I just forget what happens in the previous comic. I think I'm going to have to be a trade paperback collector. Or at least someone who reads it as it comes out in volumes some way or another. And yeah, I'm so excited to read more Absolute Batman because this is absolutely stellar and everyone should read it. It's so good. It's such a refreshing take on the character whilst still being the character. And yeah, I love it. There's a fan animation of it. If you just want like a quick overview of the type of vibes to expect from Absolute Batman, type into YouTube Absolute Batman fan animation and you will probably find the video I'm talking about because I don't think there are many fan animations out there. Someone animated a portion of this story and it's delightful. Delightful is the wrong word considering what takes place in it, but it's great. Okay, so Absolute Batman is a banger, but what about the other Absolute titles? What about Absolute Superman? Absolute Superman is a fantastic read. It's really good. I really love the way they shake up his origin story. So basically, he escapes Krypton as a teenager instead of as a baby, which means our boy has trauma. Absolute Superman is also a book that they seem to primarily be using to explore the kind of like the general shape of this particular universe and what's different about it. It feels kind of like the prime Absolute book. However, it's only a fantastic read compared to Batman, because it's a little dark, and I prefer my Superman stories to be more hopeful. Although that being said, it is the highest rated Superman story out of this entire list so far, and I've put some all-time favorites pretty low. So maybe you're looking at me a little askance, to which I say, yeah, I get it. But still, Absolute Superman is a brilliant read, and I'm looking forward to again picking this up, hopefully physically, and then catching up with it. And yeah, I really enjoy it. Also, sorry, I'm going to make a small modification. Don't hate me. I'm not saying it's subjectively a better story than Watchmen. If I was talking objectivity, All-Star Superman would be much higher. The Death of Superman would be much higher, of course. But, in terms of subjective enjoyment, I think Absolute Batman is above Watchmen. But you know what's above Absolute Batman? Absolute Wonder Woman. Oh my god, Absolute Wonder Woman is incredible. It might be the best thing I've read this year. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I've still got to make that decision. I'm going to make that decision over the course of doing this video. But holy shit, Absolute Wonder Woman is incredible. I couldn't even really tell you specifically why, and maybe that's because it's been a while since I read it now, but I love that she was brought up in hell, but she's still, at her core, the same kind of a person, and she's just badass. I love watching her fight monsters and demons and all that kind of stuff. I love her tattoos. I love what's going on with her arm and everything, and honestly, just oh yeah, the panel work as well. I got to shout out the panel work. It's very, very unique the way it's all laid out on the page. The art is incredible, and I'm just in love with this comic. It's so good. It's so good. And it's the reason why I stopped trying to read monthly issues, because I read I got the notification on my iPad, and I went and I read the latest one to hit DC Universe Infinite, and I just couldn't really remember why she was in the Minotaur's maze. That's as far as I've got, and I went, well, I know I would enjoy this as much as I did when I was binging it. And if I can't binge it, I don't want to read it in, 20 pages once a month kind of a format. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to when this is all out. I'm not gonna wait until it's all out, but I'm really looking forward to when this is all out, so I'll probably do a binge read through of all of it. Assuming, of course, it remains this high quality. I should also just touch briefly upon the fact that while I didn't include them on the tier list because I never read more than, the first few issues of them as they were coming out at the time, I have read Absolute The Flash and Absolute Green Lantern, and I was enjoying those stories quite a lot too, but I just haven't read enough material from either of them to really give a definitive, kind of an impression on where they would rank against the others. Next up, we've got Superman Space Age, which is a fantastic read. If you are not aware of Superman Space Age, lately DC have been doing these kind of like, I don't know, nostalgic titles where it's not necessarily going back to the Silver Age or the Bronze Age or whatever, but it is kind of like taking inspiration from those kinds of comics, both narratively and artistically. And Superman Space Age, while I don't remember all of the details, it's pretty much set around a time of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and what a Superman of a Earth, an Earth, I guess, how he deals with the crisis and tries to save people, and it's just really, really good. It's basically meant to be analogous to our Superman of that age, but it's a really fun way of going about the story. Honestly, I'm down for rereading this right now because I've already forgotten a fair amount of it, and I remember really liking it. It definitely belongs in fantastic reads. Then we've got The Batman Who Laughs, which was... It was, okay, so this was this was more of a standalone graphic novel dealing with the idea of the Batman Who Laughs, versus Batman, I guess. It wasn't this big universal story like Dark Knight's Metal was, but it was like, a standard Batman story with the Batman Who Laughs as a villain. And, it was disturbing it was meant to be disturbing, but it wasn't fun. It was disturbing. Some of the at least I guess philosophy presented by the villain in this book was disturbing anyway. And we rehashed some ideas that showed up in Dark Knight's Metal, and I think I preferred it to the event in general, but I think it's going to belong in the air column with its predecessor. I know it's a popular character, and I do love the design of the character and the premise behind the character, but as for actually telling a grounded story with a character, okay, now we've got some explaining. So Batman Zero Year, this is specifically Zero Year Part 2. So for those of you who don't follow the channel and do not know, I own the Legacy of Batman Eaglemoss collection, and this year I've started up a series called The Bat Catalogue, where I go and I read through each and every single one, and because of that, I don't feel like I'm reading through an era of Batman, you know, not in the same way that I read through like Rebirth era Flash or Rebirth era Nightwing. So I'm not just going to put one book representing the entire thing, because it's very different all the way through, chopping and changing writers, so we need to deal with each book on an individual basis, despite the fact that this is part of a larger run. I'm not reading the larger run, I'm reading it as part of a weird, curated kind of a run, kind of a thing. So Batman Zero Year, we will assess this book by itself. Oh, and the reason why it's a part 2 and not a part 1 is because I can't read Batman Zero Year part 1 again. I've tried to start this project so many times, so I started with part 2, which isn't ideal. It did affect how I felt about the story, but it was a good time. I enjoyed it. I know some people love Zero Year. It's not my favorite Batman origin, but it's fun. It's great. Obviously, Greg Capullo's artwork as well is gorgeous, and this is Scott Snyder in his element, telling solo Batman stories, and it's Batman versus the Riddler after the Riddler has taken over Gotham City, and yeah, it's a good fun story, and I quite like it. It's a good fun early Batman story. I don't know if I agree with it being an origin / beginning story, although I did like the origin side of the story where we saw Bruce Wayne's childhood and stuff like that. It didn't really do anything too new in that regard, but it didn't need to, and it shouldn't have, so yeah, this is a good book. Then we segue over to Batman First Knight, which is again another one of those nostalgic kind of a books like with Superman Space Age, except this one seeks to recapture the world of Golden Age Batman. So we're following Batman in the 1940s, and he's got his purple gloves and his tall ears and everything. But it's like a new adventure set during that time, and it's written in more of a modern way, and it also like views the time in more of a contemporary way that the books themselves I don't think did during the time. So it has themes about the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism and stuff like that, and it's like a noir kind of a book as well, and this is really, really solid. I would put this next to Superman Space Age as a fantastic read. I recommend anyone to go and read it. I think it might be part of like the Black Label stuff. So it won't be on like a standard DC Universe Infinite subscription. I did have like the Ultra subscription for a little bit, and that's what I read this on. But yeah, it's really, really solid. I really like it, and actually I wouldn't say no to more adventures in this continuity. And then we've got Batman Year One, which is a masterpiece, but that's objectively speaking. How did I feel about it subjectively? This was part of my Eaglemoss reading. Yeah, it's a fantastic read. Is it one of my favorites? Absolute favorites? It's a fantastic read, probably top of fantastic reads. It straddles the border for sure. It's I definitely prefer this as an origin story for Batman over Zero Year. It's dark and it's gritty. Everyone's spoken at length about Batman Year One. I don't necessarily have anything new to say about it, other than I like the focus it has on showing two perspectives, both Bruce Wayne's perspective and Gordon's perspective. I remember I actually watched the animated movie before I ever read this, and I think that one focused a little bit more on Gordon's perspective, because I remember joking about it should have been called Gordon Year One. But I feel like this book really struck the right balance, and it was really important, I think, to show both perspectives, because you have the side from, you know, Batman trying to do his thing, and like seeing how difficult it is to actually do, and then you have Gordon seeing it from everyone else's eyes, I guess, of like, there's this crazy man running around dressed as a bat. Is he actually good for the city? Should I actually be working with this man? And yeah, it's Batman Year One. It's obviously seminal. Now, I think this entire time, from me talking about Rebirth era Nightwing to now, I was kind of slowly making my way through Rebirth era Nightwing. And so I finished Volume 7, and I started Volume 1 with Tom Taylor. And I mean, it's peak. It's it's peak, but how peak is it? Where do I put it among peak? How do I measure peak versus peak? I think the fact that it takes place in the mainline continuity scores it some points, because I think it's almost more difficult to tell a story of this caliber within the mainline continuity, because you are working within guidelines. You are working you There are rules to what you can and cannot do. I mean, there's always rules to what you can and cannot do, but there are more strict rules to it. And somehow Tom Taylor manages to tell a story which is so heartfelt, and it is kind of a deconstruction in some ways of the superhero genre. Like, there are some things which you start to see happen and you kind of expect them to happen that way, and then Batgirl is like, no, shut up, you're not doing this alone just because you love me. Don't be an idiot. And it's great. It's fantastic. And yeah, as I mentioned, Batgirl's in it. That's another part of this which I adore. I really like Nightwing's burgeoning relationship with Batgirl. Obviously not for the first time, but like the fact that they're kind of portrayed as being in their mid to late 20s now. They've matured from even when they, even when he took up the mantle of Nightwing, which was him becoming an adult for the first time. This is him really starting to mature into like proper adulthood. And they kind of adopt a dog together. I love Bitewing, and I love everything about this era. I might have to put it to the top for now. We may reassess later, but it is absolutely one of the best things I've read all year, and I'm exceptionally fond. And I'm scared to read what comes after. I haven't touched it, because if anyone breaks up Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon, I'm going to be furious. They're perfect for each other, especially at this point in their lives. Now, at this point, I started discovering DC Compact Comics, and the first one I ever read was Batwoman Elegy, and that was an interesting one, because as a compact comic goes, it's not actually as self-contained as some of them are, or as they're kind of sold to be. This isn't the very beginning of Kate Kane's story as Batwoman, and it kind of shows. You do start the book going like, wait, what's happening here? There are some supernatural elements which don't continue through the book, and you don't really have a super great idea as to who she is, except this does end up giving her like an origin story and retracing her steps as to how she became Batwoman and how she was dismissed from the military due to bigotry and stuff like that. And I really do love this character. I didn't necessarily love the villain of the book, or like some of the stuff that the book was doing thematically in terms of, like the Lewis Carroll inspired stuff. But it was a really, really, really good story. It's a fantastic read. And my only real issue with this book, beyond it kind of starting a little abruptly because it's not starting with like her first appearance or anything, is that it doesn't feel like it necessarily comes to a definitive conclusion. And again, that's because this storyline, I believe, continues afterwards past this book. So despite all of that, it is still a fantastic read, and I really do want to read more. I wouldn't be mad if they started doing sequels to Compact Comics. I would happily pick up Batwoman Book 2. You know what I'm saying? I really do want them to start doing that. Don't be afraid to put a 2 on some of these books, but I know they won't sell quite as well when they do that, but still. I think they should. Then I wanted to start exploring the character of Green Lantern, and I'd heard about this Emerald Twilight storyline of when, he kind of quote unquote went mad. Obviously it's been retconned, and I really wanted to read the Jeff Johns run of Green Lantern, which we'll get into in a minute, but I knew that his history of the Emerald Twilight thing happening, where Coast City, I believe it's called, got wiped off the map and he kind of lost his mind. I knew that was going to be an important part of his character, so I decided to just very quickly nip back in time and read that story. Not necessarily everything leading up to it, not necessarily all the consequences which happened after. I actually did end up looking at a Wikipedia page just because I wanted to jump ahead. But I read Emerald Twilight, and, it's a little bit like the death of Superman, in that I should have read more beforehand and I should have read more after the fact, because I kind of just read the thing itself. But it was still pretty cool to read. It was still a good time. I'll put it at the bottom of a good time because it's kind of straddling that and But yeah, I'm glad I read this. I wouldn't say no to reading some kind of, compendium which kind of collects, much like the Death and Return of Superman. If they ever do a compendium which collects like Emerald Twilight and some of the events before and after it, I would be interested in maybe picking that up. But no, all this was so that I could get into Geoff Johns' Green Lantern, which I have heard everywhere from everyone is a fantastic, almost a definitive Green Lantern run. And I'm going to be real, I don't have any strong opinions about this book, but the opinions I do have are mild distaste, and I know that's a controversial opinion. But honestly, it's because the good stuff was just kind of good, and there was some bad stuff, which just kind of made me feel like Hal Jordan was an asshole. And I guess this was like late 90s, early 2000s comics, so maybe I shouldn't be too hard on Geoff Johns here, but there were some times where he's like going, oh god, you look ugly, you look freaky, what the hell is wrong with your face, kind of a thing. And there's times when like I think he like beats on an imprisoned villain because the villain talked down to him, and like it's not presented in that way. You're not supposed to think that Hal Jordan is this guy who beats villains in cages because they're mean to him, kind of thing. But I couldn't stop myself from looking at that with a bit of a critical eye, and I think because of that, I have a negative opinion about this book in a way that a lot of people don't. And this is the omnibus, by the way. I said I had the DC Universe Ultra subscription, and I read the omnibus digitally through that. And the omnibus, I've heard, isn't actually mapped that well. And by mapping, I mean that's when they decide what order the individual stories go in. They have just released a Geoff Johns Green Lantern compendium which remaps it to be more in like a story told chronological order, and I think maybe, despite my opinion on this book and despite me having fairly recently read it, I am also kind of tempted to pick up that compendium, because maybe reading it through in a better order would change. Maybe I would feel more positively about this book, but as it is, I'm going to put it next to All-Star Superman in Air. These two are kind of, or these three, I guess, kind of exist in the, I know people love these, I'm clearly missing something about why people love these. But I did read like the first half of Omnibus Volume 2 as well before I gave up. Yeah, maybe Green Lantern just isn't my kind of a character, I don't know. Up next, I have Action Comics Rebirth Era Volume 1, and I really don't have all that much to say about it. I think this was largely forgettable. This book brought back Doomsday, but in a way which was like, oh look, they're doing Doomsday again. I guess to be fair, it was more like, oh, Doomsday is going to go after Superman's son because of what Doomsday is coded to do, right? And so there's a little bit more urgency and like, oh shit, it's not just that he might destroy Metropolis and kill me, you know, there's more personal stakes involved of like, he's going after my son. And I think, if I remember right, Wonder Woman gets involved. I'm a little confused because the cover seems to indicate that this is like a Metallo story. I think that's who that is on the cover. But this is Action Comics Rebirth Volume 1, and that is... Maybe I didn't read all of it, and I just thought I did. Maybe it's just the first few issues which deal with Doomsday, I don't know. As you can tell, I don't recall much of this book, so I think I'm going to put this here. If a book is forgettable, I think it has to go in the I don't remember it very well category. I don't necessarily have a actively negative opinion towards this book. It just kind of like bounced off me. Like, you know how you can bounce off books? It's more like this book bounced off me. Next up, we have another compact comic. We have Far Sector by N.K. Jemisin, who is a famous fantasy and science fiction author, and she is taking on a DC comic. And the best thing about this compact comic is you don't need to know anything about the Green Lantern Corps, the Green Lantern stories. You don't need to know anything about DC Comics. You don't need to know anything about comics. This is just a fantastic science fiction story. I think I'm going to put it bottom of Fantastic Read So, because it did take me a while to get through. Not because the story was bad in any way, but I just, yeah, I got a little distracted away from it somewhere in the middle. I still had a fantastic time with it, though. I do kind of wish, you know, I'm happy with most of my compact comics. I think Far Sector is the one exception of a book I might have preferred to own in slightly like more traditional volume size format, because the art is stunning, and it's the kind of art style like you need to be able to see at a particular size. I was kind of squinting at objects in the distance a little bit during this, and also it's so colourful that there were some pages which just felt like the ink hadn't set properly, if you know what I mean. It was only near the very beginning of this book, but there were a couple of pages where, like, for instance, the blacks were blending into the white speech bubbles, and you could tell it was like reading the book on 480p instead of 1080p, and it was like, oh man. But that might be more of an issue with the printing than the book itself. It shouldn't take away from how I feel about the book itself. And yeah, I think everyone should read Far Sector. It's a really good read. Up next, we have Batman Prey, which is what I would call a hidden gem of a Batman story. By Doug Munch. I've heard people say Doug Munch. I've heard people say Doug Moench. Either way, it takes place during the pages of Legends of the Dark Knight during the 90s, and it tells a story which kind of riffs on Batman Year One a little bit. It's kind of a semi-sequel to it, despite the fact that Year One actually has a legitimate sequel. And it's a story that takes place early in Batman's career, but it also reintroduces us to Dr. Hugo Strange within this more down-to-earth, gritty continuity that they've just begun. And he's trying to psychologically deconstruct Batman. And it's a really interesting story. I really, really like it. I wouldn't say objectively speaking it's one of the best Batman stories out there, but I think I'm going to plop this on the end of Fantastic Reads because I personally had a really good time with it. Next up, we have Wonder Woman Earth 1, another compact comic, and this didn't have what I wanted out of a Wonder Woman story. This took place mostly around Earth, and it was less to do with, like, fantasy and Greek mythology and stuff like that, stuff of that nature, and it was more to do with, like, how would mankind react to the discovery of the island of Themyscira and this Amazon warrior race of women who are not just, like, extremely powerful, but also more scientifically advanced than anyone on the planet is really capable of at that point. And there's a lot of political commentary in there, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but there is also some stuff in there which makes me go, huh. It has a lot of callbacks to some of the saucier roots for the character, which some people have called out as being problematic. And it's interesting that those got brought back in a modern age. And, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely not the kind of read I was expecting. I will put it... I'll put it here in a good time, because it is a good read, and I would still recommend it to people just as long as they know what they're getting into, which I didn't. Next up, we have Batman Haunted Knight, which is a fantastic read for sure. It's not necessarily the beginning of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's run, nor is it necessarily the end, because it is a collection of stories they released each Halloween, so it's kind of like... you can read it really at the start or the end, and the particular reading order I was doing recommend reading it at the beginning. I think most people do recommend it for the end, but this is a collection of very spooky stories, and it has Tim Sale's amazing art in it, which just really adds to the entire vibe. But it's, stories, as I've already said, of like a spooky nature, but it's not just that, it's also stories which explore Bruce Wayne's psyche, how do you say that? Anyway, there's some really touching moments in this book as well, especially like with one of the stories which revolves around him remembering his mother, and yeah, that holds a bit of a special place for me. And this just kind of like goes to foreshadow where the other books are going to end up on this list. But turns out, I know it's a completely original opinion, but the Jeff Loeb Tim Sale Batman run, pretty good. Okay, so you remember how I said I shouldn't have read The Death of Superman in a vacuum, and I shouldn't have read Green Lantern Emerald Twilight in a vacuum? Those were on me. But Daredevil Born Again is presented as a standalone story which anyone can appreciate at any moment, and it's true. It is a standalone story which anyone can appreciate, except it does expect a certain knowledge of Daredevil's past. And it is kind of like, it takes place a little bit either afterwards or towards the end of Frank Miller's Daredevil run. And I found myself not really appreciating the events that took place in this book because, at the end of the day, I did pick up a Daredevil book, and you don't actually get much Daredevil action in this book. Obviously, it's a very famous story of Matt Murdock reacting to his life being systematically ruined by Kingpin after Kingpin learns his secret identity. And I respect what it is as a comic book and as what it is, within the canon of Daredevil. It's an incredibly important book and an incredibly important moment. But I just don't love it. And maybe I'll love it after I read through Frank Miller's run. But it was the earliest Daredevil story I'd ever read at the time. And it just didn't really land for me the way I was expecting it to, and the way everyone expects it to. So again, I think this is a top of kind of a story. Like it, I'm tempted to put it on a good time just because, it's Daredevil Born Again. What the hell do you mean? And it's one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. But I'll have to come back to this another time and actually read it in a way that's going to have me enjoy it for what it's supposed to be. Now, next up we have Batman The Long Halloween, which I had to grab as a compact comic because for whatever reason Eaglemoss Collections didn't see fit to include it, despite including Dark Victory later, which is insane to me. But Batman The Long Halloween is peak Batman detective fiction. If you want a Batman sleuthing book, this is your book. And of course, as I already mentioned with Haunted Knight, this has got art from Tim Sale in it. And it's just like a noir detective story. And honestly, this is one of those books where the less you say about it, the better, because people should discover it for themselves. But I don't think it would be a surprise to say that a detective story has a twist near the end. Okay? That's not going to ruin your reading experience. Every detective story has a twist near the end. But this twist is very good. Up next we have Superman Birthright, which is hailed by many as being possibly the best telling of Superman's origin story, and I agree, it's absolutely fantastic. That being said, I haven't read every Superman origin story, but it's very grounded and it's very human, and I love a lot of the messaging that Mark Waid had to say about the character and the way that people see the character, and I think this is gonna easily be in a fantastic read section, probably next to Haunted Knight. Although that is me saying Absolute Superman is better than Superman Birthright, and that's not necessarily the case. I might bump this down here. There we go. That feels better. That feels right. But yeah, there's some really good stuff in this book with like Ma and Pa Kent and like him traveling to Metropolis for the first time and integrating himself into the Daily Planet and all that stuff. It's just great. If you're new to the character, it's probably the perfect book to pick up as well. It's not like the most modern book out there, it's like early 2000s, but it does feel ahead of its time in a few ways. Then we've got Batman Dark Victory to talk about, which is kind of like, if Haunted Knight didn't exist, it would be the second half of the Jeff Loeb Tim Sale run. It's not as easy to quantify as that, sadly. But yeah, Dark Victory is the sequel to The Long Halloween, and it deals with the ramifications of a lot of the things that happened in that story. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much, but I still really, really bloody loved it, especially since it provided a somewhat unexpected origin story for Robin. Like, it's the one we all know, but it ties it into the events of the book in a way which makes it so that the introduction of Robin doesn't just feel like a tacked on thing. It feels natural, and the way in which like Dick Grayson becomes Robin and stuff feels like a natural kind of progression throughout the book as well. So yeah, I would put this here as well. Again, didn't love it quite as much as Batman The Long Halloween, but it thoroughly deserves its spot near the top of this list. Then we have Batman The Man Who Laughs, which is sort of the story in which Batman first meets the Joker. And what I really love about this book, or this story, is that it calls back to the very first issue of Batman, in which Batman does deal with a Joker for the first time, because the way Joker kills his first victim is the way Joker kills his first victim in that book as well. So while this might be a completely different continuity, and while it might have been written like 60 years later, it still calls back to the origins of Joker as a villain, and I really like that. All in all, it's kind of just a thoroughly okay book, but it is, I would say it's more on the side of a good time than it is on the side of I would put it here. I would put it maybe above. Nah, we'll put it on the end of a good time. Again, I always reserve the right to shuffle these mid-video. Then we have Batman The Killing Joke, which, if anyone saw my video about it, it's called, Well, You Can't Love All the Classics. I respect that this is a beloved Batman story that many find very important for the character. I thought it relied a little bit too heavily on shock value and didn't say anything too new, which is probably a crazy and terrible thing to say, I know. But yeah, the Joker, in this book, the Joker talks about how with just one bad day, anyone could become him. And, Batman sets out to disprove that. And Jim Gordon disproves that after what he suffers through. And, it's a decent plot, I suppose, but there are some turns taken through the story which were done for shock value, which I didn't agree with. But it just left it. It's supposed to leave a bad taste in your mouth. I know this is supposed to point at the Joker and go, no, not just funny clown man, but dangerous and disturbing individual. But it's just not fun. It's just not a fun comic. This feels like when I read Daredevil Born Again, and I read Death of Superman, and I read Green Lantern Emerald Twilight, where I knew that I was missing a wider context, which would help me enjoy those stories more, except there is no wider context to this story. It was originally meant to be an out-of-continuity story, apparently. And yeah, it's just, the Joker does a bad thing. Look how bad the thing that the Joker does is. I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to move Teen Titans up, because Teen Titans doesn't deserve to be below those. Teen Titans didn't do anything wrong. These books did things wrong. I mean, this maybe not so much, but these two certainly did. Then we have Deceased, which I chose to be my Halloween read, and was also the first trade paperback I've picked up in years. Compact comics are a gateway drug, and I really enjoyed my time reading Deceased. As I've already said, I am a sucker for an Elseworlds novel. Graphic novel, you know what I mean. And this one is basically the DC version of Marvel Zombies, but the thing that really sold it for me is that it's written by Tom Taylor, who wrote Injustice and wrote that Nightwing run, which I'm talking about up there. And I think this might be the first time I've ever bought a book based on knowing that I like the author, at least for a comic book. And yeah, he did not disappoint. This is a fantastic story. It's so bleak. It's so maudlin. It made me want to go and read some Constantine, because he appears in this book and he seems like a really fun character. I've yet to really check that out, but I feel like I would really enjoy Constantine. But yeah, it's a really fun what-if kind of a scenario, even though DC legally aren't allowed to say those words out loud. And it belongs near the top of fantastic reads. Okay, we're gonna shuffle. I think maybe that needs to be there, and then this can be here. I think if this was volume 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man onwards, it would be a little bit higher, but volume 2 can go here. Up next, we have another compact comic in the form of Wonder Woman Blood and Guts, which is the kind of Wonder Woman story I was looking for. It is the start of a New 52 run, and I know people have opinions about the New 52 comics. I tend to quite enjoy them, knowing that they're this kind of like, not necessarily out of continuity, but a little bit of wonky continuity. That being said, it didn't really feel that way with Blood and Guts. Maybe some of the gods had redesigns, I wouldn't be surprised to learn, but yeah. This deals with Greek mythology and Wonder Woman's place within it, and I had a really good time reading this book. I'm definitely going to put this in the Fantastic Reads category, probably. I would put it here next to Batwoman Elegy. We've got a nice little trio of compact comics here, and I think that's where they belong. I think that's a pretty good place for them. But yeah, there's stuff in here about Wonder Woman's origins, like her true origins as she discovers them and what that means for her as a character. And there's also stuff about her trying to protect a mortal woman carrying the latest child of Zeus, and all the gods trying to, like, you know, get her basically, and it's just a really fun read. Up next is the only Doctor Who comic I've read this year so far, and that's Terraformer, which is the first volume of the 12th Doctor Adventures, and this is a really solid story. I was a little hesitant to pick up this book because the only other Doctor Who volume I own is the 10th Doctor Adventures Volume 1, and that really didn't do it for me, and it kind of put me off Doctor Who comics. It's not necessarily awful, but it just didn't capture the voice of a 10th Doctor very well. But this one does capture the voice of a 12th Doctor pretty perfectly, and also tells a surprisingly compelling plot. It mostly tells two stories over the course of like 4 or 5 or 6 issues. I didn't really notice as I was flipping through them, but there are kind of two halves to this book which tell two stories, but they're linked together in a pretty interesting way. I did prefer the first story over the second, but I did really enjoy both stories. I'm gonna put this near the bottom of Fantastic Reads, I think, because I definitely want to keep reading and seeing where the story goes. Unlike the 10th Doctor book, which kind of felt like it was trying to be fan servicey for people who wanted more 10th Doctor, this felt like it was just a Doctor Who story which was trying to tell a story in its own right, and that was really cool. Up next we have Superman Batman Book 1, which implies a Book 2. I'm telling you, we're going to get some compact comics equals eventually. But yeah, this is the Jeff Loeb Superman Batman book, or at least the first 2 trade paperbacks stuck together in a compact comic, and the 2 stories it tells, one of them is Lex Luthor is the president and there is a kryptonite meteorite hurtling towards Earth, which is going to destroy all life. And for whatever reason, Lex Luthor blames Superman and sends a bunch of heroes after Superman for it. And, you know, it felt a little convoluted and contrived in how that happened, but it was a pretty good thing. And then the second story introduces Supergirl into the modern DC continuity, which was also really fun. I did have some issues with this book, but ultimately it was a really good time, and I think I would put it around about here maybe near the top of a good time. Yeah, it's a solid read. I would recommend it. I really enjoyed it for like examining the friendship between Batman and Superman, because you got like the inner monologues of both characters alongside their dialogue, and it's a really effective combination. But now it is finally time to talk about Invincible and confront the question I've been wrestling with for a few weeks, which is, what is my favorite book of the year? Is it Absolute Wonder Woman? Is it Tom Taylor's Nightwing? Or is it the entirety of Invincible? Because that's what this one picture represents. All 25 trade paperback volumes, which I read via Global Comics. And man, it's a difficult one. Okay, so I've got a whole video about why I love Invincible, but the main thing is, it is both a deconstruction of superhero comics whilst also being unashamedly one of them, because it takes tropes, it examines them, it takes them apart, it goes, okay, this might be a dumb idea, this might be something that shouldn't be repeated over and over again, but also it looks at superhero comics and goes, yeah, we should have this goofy-ass guy tearing up downtown somewhere or other, and then our protagonist flies in and tries to stop him, and then there's some goofy banter and stuff like that. We're going to take some time to examine whether there's a better resolution to the conflict than just punching each other, but we're also still going to do the comic book thing. And I really love the lore. It feels like it starts off as like a pastiche comic, and then it expands into its own thing, and every character that it introduces kind of evolves from the Invincible version of this famous character into an actual, unique, well-rounded character with similar looking powers to someone else. And I love it so much. I love the story it tells. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like changed my life or changed how I view comics or anything like that, but it was such a good read, and I'm trying to hold off watching the show until it's finished so that I can just binge the show. But I did watch season 1 when it came out, and I do know that it adds to the story in some pretty good ways, because there are some flaws in this story. But yeah, putting it up against, let's be real, we're going to put it up against Nightwing here. And which did I enjoy more? Which one deserves the top spot more? Because Invincible definitely has recency bias. I read Nightwing a little while ago, but the difficult thing is I think I enjoyed both of them pretty much an equal amount. But Invincible is its own IP, right? It's its own story. And so does that give it extra points, do you think, for being a completely unique invention? I don't know, man. Maybe I'll change my mind by the end of this video, but I think Invincible takes the top spot for now. I think it's got to. It's still in the back of my mind. Maybe this is the prime kind of reasoning for why it should take the top spot. I finished this book weeks ago and it's still in the back of my mind. I'm not sure Nightwing stayed in the back of my mind for quite as long after I finished it. Maybe it did, but I'm not feeling that. So maybe recency bias is going to help take this one. I guess that kind of spoils at least a little bit about how I felt about the rest of the comics down here, doesn't it? But anyway, so next up we have Spawn, Origin Volume 1, which isn't actually how I read this. I just started reading the single issues on Global Comics, but it happens to align with everything that's collected here with where I stopped. I decided to check out Spawn. I wanted to see what else Image Comics had to offer, and it's of its time. It's very edgy. It is extremely edgy, but it kind of owns it, and it's kind of fun for it. I just don't know if I'm necessarily in the mood for it to keep going with it right now. But yeah, Spawn, it's a good time. It's a good time. It's not gonna beat a lot of the stuff that's on this tier, but I think it does belong on this tier. It's a good time, and I'm glad I read it. And I'm a little curious to see more, but not that curious. Don't expect a read through of the entirety of Spawn anytime soon. But you know, like it's edgy, but it's also got like narrative chops. Like, it actually deals with some themes which are pretty interesting, because the main character, it's not spoiling too much to say the main character comes back from death in an unrecognizable manner, and discovers that the world has moved on without him and is having to deal with that. And I could see that maybe being explored more deeply in further volumes in a really interesting way. But also, it's 90s and it's edgy as hell, and it does not pull punches when talking about pretty distressing subject matters sometimes. Now we have 4 by Dan Jurgens, because I wanted to read some 4 and I didn't know where to start, and I'm gonna tell you right off the bat that this image represents the first 11 or 12 issues of Dan Jurgens' run. I didn't get all that far through. It's probably like the first 2 or 3 trade paperback volumes. It's not bad. It's 90s era 4, late 90s era, early 2000s era 4, but it's very like, you know, it takes place in New York. It deals with a secret identity thing. Due to a convoluted reason, 4 is having to pretend to live the life of this mortal who he actually isn't, and that comes with some kind of morally questionable things. And then there's some stuff dealing with the Asgardians and these figures called the Dark Gods and stuff. And it was good and it was interesting, and I honestly might go back and keep reading it at some point, but it wasn't really the flavor of 4 that I was necessarily looking for at the time. It was... It doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means that I decided not to continue with it in this particular instance, and I think that's why it can't be labeled as a good time, because I legitimately stopped and went, maybe there's something else I could read instead. You know, and that's why 4 is down here. Now we've got Siege. This is complicated because this picture represents all of 4 volume 3, which I'll talk about in a minute. But as part of that, I had to read the Siege event. And much like how I've talked before about how important it is to read certain comic stories within certain contexts, and without the wider context, sometimes you can't appreciate the story quite so much for what it is, I would argue that's also the case for Siege. I very, very recently did this video on 4 volume 3 in Siege, and I talked a lot in that video about, I think, the limiting factor of cross comic events in like how they affect like the actual core storyline. But Siege for me was definitely more of a hurdle than it was something that I actually wanted to check out and read for myself and was excited for and anticipating. It did have some really cool set pieces, but I wasn't here for it. I wasn't excited to read Siege. It was just a hurdle to overcome, you know? And I think that's all I've really got to say about it. Maybe in the future one day I'll do like a new Avengers read through, and I'll get to Siege again, and I'll know more about the context of who these characters are and what's happening. I'll enjoy it a lot more. But from the context of someone who only read Siege as part of reading through 4 volume 3, it's just an from me, fam. Now, Batman Terror is a sequel to Batman Prey, written by Doug Moench again, and it takes place, well, I mean, it doesn't take place 10 years after. It was written 10 years after the original. And, you know, it's a pretty good sequel. It's fun. It has some flaws. For instance, it commits the cardinal ongoing comics flaw of characters should die sometimes, and they really, really stretch the bounds of plausibility with a particular character staying alive in this book, and that definitely negates some points. It loses some points for that. However, it was also just a legitimately good story which fleshed out the character of the Scarecrow a little bit more, and it was a good time. It's going to go near the top of a good time, I think. It's definitely not better than Batman Zero Year, so it can't go above that, but I think it'll go above Dark Knight's Metal, Dark Knight's Rising. I enjoyed my time with this one. I'm glad it got a sequel. It's not necessarily as good as Prey itself, but you know, it's a fun read. It's very much a middle of the pile kind of a read, as you can see with its placement. And to round off this list of everything I read this year in comics is 4 Volume 3, which I just today, I think, recorded a video all about. So I don't want to rehash everything I just said. You can go watch the video if you want to know more about my thoughts. But when I say 4 Volume 3, I'm talking about 4 by J. Michael Straczynski. I'm talking about 4, obviously, the Siege event. I'm talking about 4 by Kieran Gillen. And I'm talking about 4 by Matt Fraction a little bit too. And as a single entity, it has its ups and downs. And I'll go more into detail in the ups and downs in that video that I've already put out if you want to go watch that. But the long and short of it is that the J. Michael Straczynski stuff is absolute peak. The Siege event is a bit of a bump in the road. It's obviously relevant to the events of a comic and probably the reason that the comic line exists in the first place. But it definitely takes away from some of the individual storytelling that was taking place before it. A lot of the Kieran Gillen stuff was of a lower caliber of storytelling, I think, but I did still enjoy it. And then the Matt Fraction stuff feels like it's setting up for next era more than anything, and is intriguing and exciting, but again, not quite as good as the J. Michael Straczynski stuff. So I think I'm gonna put it at the top of a good time. But you know, just know it could have been a fantastic read and near the top of fantastic reads if it was just for J. Michael Straczynski stuff. The other stuff does start to weigh it down a little bit, but this is what I've read of 4, and I did pretty highly enjoy it. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. This video was longer than I expected, and it's quite late now. But we did it. We ranked everything except, is there anything I want to move? I think I want to put Batman Haunted Knight above Superman Birthright, and maybe I'll put Superman Batman above Rebirth Era Justice League. I'm changing the title of this yellow tier to maybe with more context as well as air. And also, while we're here, I want to give a quick shout out to the people who skip towards the end of tier lists and make judgments without listening to any of the reasoning. You must be very angry about some of these. But, you know, you can go ahead and leave your angry comment at the door. Trust me, I've done tier lists before. I know how these things work. These are all my subjective opinions, and subjective is right. I know that some of these books deserve better. But yeah, I think I'm happy with this for, like, my general overview of what I read this year and how I felt about it. I'm hopefully going to do another one of these next year, although that does seem kind of daunting because I only really started getting really excited about reading comics halfway through this year, which means that prospectively this time next year this list could be twice this size. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this list, and I think that's going to do it for me. So let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Again, no, like, you know, you don't have to be upset if I didn't like something you loved, and I don't have to be upset if you didn't like something that I loved. We're all different people at the end of the day, and that's what being human is all about. But yeah, this is gonna do it for me. I'm gonna go rest my voice, and I will catch you in whatever I make next. We also have some frankly outdated stuff about, you know, him having to win a context. About him having to win a context. Fucking hell. About him having to win. This might be at the end of the video. This is a silly blooper.